here we are, Renee. Another week, another podcast. What are we talking about this week?
Hey, man, we're talking about adapting to change and how we manage change. The world seems to be going crazy. So there's a lot going on. So we thought maybe we'd dive into talking about how do we do that and talk about some of the data and the statistics around change in general and whether it works or it doesn't work and all of the issues there. So, Jason, before we dive into talking about change, talk to us about what is going on the farm this week.
Well, one thing that never changes is State Fair Week, right? Or County Fair Week, depending on where you are. And it's a farmer responsibility to head to the fair. Now, I'm guessing, I know you go to the fair a lot, but I'm guessing we have very different focuses when we go to the fair.
Yes. Yes. When I go to the
I'm
fair, I'm there with my nephew, and I'm usually sitting in the tractors and sitting in all the new cars and not buying one thing, not one thing. But that's what I'm normally doing.
You see, I'm looking for the State Fair special, but I can't afford the new equipment when I go
Uh-oh.
sit in the tractor, or look at that new tillage equipment. But, it's a requirement to go look at the livestock and go around and be farmerish at the fair and look at all the new gizmos and whatever. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not going to complain today. Well, unless it's too humid or it's raining at the fair. So I want the weather to be like a constant 75 the day I go to the fair.
Mm,
Otherwise I'll complain the whole time that I'm too sweaty, it's too hot, or it's rainy and I'm miserable. So
that's true. August is pretty fun in Iowa. You would think it's consistently hot, but there's been some really pleasant days at the state fair. And some days are really pleasant and some other days are just miserable. So you just never know. But I do love going to the state fair. But for me, it's not about looking at the new stuff. Unless my nephew's there, he wants to see all the new equipment. And what's crazy is the boy's 10 and he can tell me the difference between this year's model of blah, blah, blah and last year's model of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's a tractor. And so I can go as far as it's green and it's blue and it's yellow and it's whatever. And he is like, no, no, this is the brand new blah, 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 blah. So I'm thinking that, that kind of field is in his future. He's just really into all that. So
oh,
today we're going to dive in talking about change. And when Jason and I go out on the road speaking, we talk a lot about, just what all is different in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, a lot of things are different. And especially people's anxiety and depression scale and how they're doing and how people are coping. But, it really has to do with just ongoing change. And so today we're going to chat about that. So, Jason, why did you want to talk about this topic and kind of where are we coming from this conversation about change and change management?
well, I've been getting a lot of phone calls lately just around system change and the rapid pace of system change today. We've just been through a huge shift in our behavioral health system here in the state of Iowa. And sometimes it feels like we're so busy changing that we've forgotten about all the things we learned in the past. So I thought it might be good just to revisit how do we manage our way through when things are changing so quickly? And it doesn't feel like we have all the information. I talked to a lot of executive directors and CEOs, and they just feel like they can't make any decisions. And so how do we manage all of that anxiety that comes along with change?
Yeah, there's just a lot going on. And I know you and I talked about this before the recording, but one of the things that's really different is just we're in the information age and we can be overloaded with information. So it's one thing to deal with our own systems and our own changes, but then you can see at any moment you could pull up what's going on in whatever other state, whatever other country around the world. And if there's bad news or traumatic news, you can hear it in an instant. And it all it does is just really gin up people and their levels of anxiety. We just have way too much information. So yes, there's a lot of change in our systems, especially around mental health, especially around even in the federal level, the changes with the Medicaid bills coming through and different things. And that's a lot of change that we in this industry have to deal with. But then you pile on top of, floods and stories of droughts and fires and all the things. It just kind of adds and adds and adds. So there's a self-care component to this too that we need to touch on because if you don't miss that part, you're going to miss the whole boat. But today we're going to kind of focus on change and change management within our systems. But we are going to talk about when we get to the, thinking about it from a self-care perspective, some of the tips and tricks that we can do to kind of manage this because it's overwhelming. You can't just be talking about this all the time. So, how do you, talk about some of the different types of changes that we're seeing just in our systems alone? I mean, there's lots going on in there.
Well, I think about kind of the back to office movement. We had a lot of
Yeah.
remote folks, and now people are being called back to the office, and people have just gotten used to managing, at working from home. And so now it's a big change, and it's very stressful. We look at all the layoffs occurring in some industries, and what that is doing to communities. Um, we just we've done some research. We know in Western Colorado, for example, there's 1,000 coal miners being laid off
Mhm.
because four of the
Mhm.
coal mines in a really rural area are closing. And so that has a huge impact on that local regional economic impact, as well as where are people going to leave? Are they going to live there? Are they going to move away so they can get jobs? Because there's not choices in some of those areas. And then as we think about overall how these funding streams are changing and how that changes what people do. And I really think it begs the question of, are we reacting? Are we responding? Because I think it makes a big difference what words we use to talk about it. Because if we're constantly reacting, then we kind of put ourselves in a victim role, right? And although
Yeah.
we don't have control of a lot of this, we can still respond and maybe come out better. If we can come out with healthier organizations, we can come out with a healthier business model if we're responding in a measured and appropriate way to the change when it occurs.
Yeah, I'd give an example here. So, been in my position now a year and a half, going closer to 2 years now, and we had to do a work from home policy because, by
Right.
God, that was everywhere, all over the map. And when I started, I didn't like people working from home, and I can't say that that's still my favorite because I can't figure out where people are and whatever. But we've got now a policy, but we've let it sit for a bit, right? We haven't touched it. It's working. Now, there are some challenges in it, but because now we haven't touched it now in a year and a half. I don't know. It's been a while. But you can see where the problems are to address them. And so I
Mhm.
think that's part of what we're saying here is like you've got to, when you make the change, don't just keep changing for change's sake, but to set it in it for a minute and then measure your challenges with it or the improvements with it. And there's a lot of things going really right in the policy we landed on. But there's a couple people that are struggling in that system. So it's not then a policy for everybody. It's a how do you help the person work within the system now that we have created, and we're helping them, potentially move upstream, getting jobs done so that other people don't have to sit and wait on them. Still some of that workflow type of challenge or cross training issues. So it's bringing to light things that need to be addressed, but the policy doesn't change. We left that alone. And I think that that's what people are missing. They're thinking because funding's changing, because where you're working is changing, or who's running the changing, that the job changed. It didn't. You still serve
Right.
the same people. You still do the same job. You still do the same policies in your manual. Many are very much the same. And we forget that part to anchor us because we're looking at all this other stuff that's changing. But the deep part, the work we do, the importance of the work we do, the clients we serve, that doesn't change. And so it's hard because you got the waves kind of crashing over the top of you.
Mhm.
But when you're anchored, knowing what you're doing and staying on point, then it is what you just said. You're then responding and not reacting. And so
Right.
you've got to really figure that out. And so your mission statements are critical during this time. Your balance books are important, like what's making you money, knowing what's not making money, where you're losing money. You've got to know those key things. And that stuff is boring because everybody wants to talk about all the flashy stuff that's changing. The flashy stuff's what's going to get you all worked up. It's the boring day in, day out doing good work that keeps you grounded in this time. And so we've got to talk about that because if we don't remember that part, right, we get too excited about all the possibilities where we could start all these new programs and you miss the boat and you then feel completely out of control.
And we know, and I think you hit the nail on the head, that organizations and a lot of the hospitals we work with, I think about clinical pathways and how many don't even have clinical pathways when it comes to
Right.
behavioral health care,
Right.
is everything's anchored in policy and written, whether it's your clinical pathways, your written procedures, all of it comes back to anchoring yourself so you know later what works and what didn't work. Because if you have a bunch of managers making stuff up as they go, then you're never able to go back and fix it or identify what's really going on. And so, I think that's where the starting place is. And this is where so much stress and anxiety comes in workplaces, is
Right.
because we don't stick to our policies or we
Right.
don't create the policies in a meaningful way and then go back and revisit them and say, this doesn't work at all. Who wrote this? We've got to
Right.
clean this up. You're right. It's boring. It's tedious. And sometimes it's too prescriptive. Sometimes it's not prescriptive enough. But as leaders, that's what we need to figure out because
Right.
let me tell you what, leadership comes and goes. Employees
Yeah.
come and go.
Yep.
That's what continues the organization. No matter if
Yeah.
you're a hospital, a nonprofit, a for-profit, that's the nuts and bolts of what you
Right.
do.
And if you're looking at what you and I've talked about many times is when you've made a policy, a change, a program, or whatever, you have to go back and look at it. Did it do what you wanted it to do?
Yep.
I think of the current changes going on in the integrated health homes in our state. There's a
Yes.
lot of people on lots of sides on that subject about how dare they get rid of those. They weren't working. Let's be
Yep.
very clear. There's lawsuits that verified they were not working, period. Stop, full stop. So if you're a
Mhm.
person out there trying to defend it, to try to tell us how great it was, how helpful, it might have been for a few people. And that's probably true. There are some people that'll be impacted, maybe negatively, but that number is very small compared to the number of people who are not getting their needs met. And so this is just like when we redesigned mental health a decade ago now when I was in the legislature.
Yep.
Nobody liked the system the way it was. So when you go to change it, everybody's like, change. You didn't like it. It wasn't working. The data's not on your side. There's nothing to say we should keep this. So then you have to change, and you change is hard. So then people get mad that we have to change. So you have to, this is why if you had the data to show that it worked, you wouldn't be where you are. That's why you do the boring stuff. Because if you could have
Right.
proved through the lawsuit on integrated health homes for children that those were the best things available and that kids were really being served, if you could have proved it, you wouldn't be where you are today because they're making changes because it didn't work. And so we can't be mad about those kind of changes because changes have to happen when systems aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And so, where are we going to like the next thing better? Maybe not. Or right now, it doesn't look like there's really specialists in the children's area in where they're
Mhm.
trying to move it to, and that's a real concern. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to have to figure that out because again, there's a lawsuit driving what's going to have to happen, and specialty for children is part of it. So it absolutely has to happen,
Mhm.
even if you can't see it right now. So it's an opportunity for those that are really good in that space to be able to do something new. Now, it sounds really scary because they announced it in July that by December things are going away. But in the meantime, you've got to build the next thing. And that's what we need to be focused on. But again, it drives back to what's your policy? What's your mission? What are you trying to do? And your data, did it show you were doing good stuff? Then maybe you have an opportunity to join the next movement and what's going to happen.
Well, and I think that's the good part of having a deadline, right? Because we're
Yep.
forced to act, right? And so this is an opportunity to respond, to
Yeah.
help to design that next thing moving forward, right? We
Yeah.
just can't go back and yell and scream that, no, we got to hang on desperately to what we have. To your point, if it doesn't work, then let's be part of the out in the front and designing what we believe can work within the
Right.
new framework that's
Yeah.
being developed in front of us in real time. We have to get comfortable doing this in real time. It's
Yeah.
not back in the old days. I remember we would design it and then implement the design a year later, right? There would be a big framework developed and we'd have big reports and we'd be like, this is what we're going to do. We'll give everyone 18 months to get comfortable with it. And then 18 months would come and go, and maybe half of it would end up getting implemented because we talk ourselves around circles that those things were going to happen, right? That wasn't necessarily effective. We felt better because it was slow, it was methodical. We
Yeah.
felt better about it. We could
Yeah.
onboard people, right?
Right.
But we wasted a lot of time.
A lot of times. So the other thing I mean, this isn't the topic today. Maybe we should just do an entire podcast on this, but 1115 waivers. Let's just talk
Oh,
about that. So this
that's a
changed
whole
for IHH.
podcast. We can't
I
do that
know,
here. Go ahead.
but I'm gonna for right this piece because when everybody wanted to change to CCBHCs and they needed the new waivers to do that, and the new SPA, the new state plan amendment to do that, where did you think the money was going to come from? Because they're cost neutral. So IHHs are going away to pay for the new system, period. End stop. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that's part of the part that went away because What you can't just keep adding on. That's not how it works. Things have to
Right.
go away. Legacy things go away for new things to come in. So every single person who fought for a change in your state plan amendment, you got what you got because you asked for it. And when people don't want to hear that because they're like, well, we need to change. There's one of my favorites right now is we need a 1115 waiver so that all the people in corrections get access to Medicaid and all these things. Okay, I'm okay with that. What are you going to stop doing and not get paid for anymore to afford that when you're talking 8,600 people currently sitting in just prison? That's not jail, just prison.
Mhm.
And all the people on supervision and all and all and all. Great.
Yep.
Love it. How are you paying for it? Right. And so there's consequences to these things. So once again, this is why you go back to your roots. What are you doing? What's your mission?
Yep.
What are we trying to do? And we don't play with all that because a lot of us aren't able to think like that. And you know your little piece, but you don't know the big picture. And so you lobby for something. And then you're like, well, that's not what I thought I asked for. Right. Right. Because it's bigger than that. So we need to dive into that more in a different conversation. But here, let's get back to this. So change initiatives, Jason, do these work when we do a new big shift change thing? What does research say about? Does this work?
Well, I'm going to link a couple of things in our show notes, but we know that probably only 20%-ish, maybe 30%-ish of
Ooh,
change initiatives succeed or
ugh,
last more than a couple of years, right?
eh,
Like
mm,
in a business
mm.
sense and organizationally, we do a really bad job of change management across the
Yeah,
board. Pretty much any data you look at is going to tell you the same thing. And it's because of the lack of framework, the lack of policies, the lack of procedures, right? Everything we talked about, you can see we didn't make up, right? The data bears that out as we have this conversation.
yeah, and I'm guilty of this. We've done a lot of good things in my office to try to make things less chaotic and less whatever because I'm sitting there in the chair. But have I gotten the opportunity to write it all down to get it into policy so that it can be there to keep things stable beyond my tenure? Currently, no, I don't. And it's a weight on me because I know better because I do this for a living. I know better than to not prioritize that because I know that that's been part of the particular issue with the Board of Parole is the chaos of 5 new chairs in a 10-year span, and every chair got to do quote their way. And that's just chaotic when you're working with people in corrections who have 20-year histories and 30-year histories who are there stable long term. The board was just like almost like a hurricane in comparison to their calm winds of the ways
Mhm.
that, right or wrong, they're just there longer term jobs, more loyalty, and they've seen people come and go, so they don't necessarily buy into what they're saying because yeah, there'll be a new person and it'll go away, all of that
Right.
stuff because it's just a lot of change. Well, a lot of it shouldn't be like that. There really should be policies in place, but if I don't take that initiative and make that so and put that stuff into writing, into operational plans, and to study it every year, to go back to remeasure, does it actually work or not? It's not going to be there. And so, it is on me as leadership. It is on all of us that are in leadership to do this for our people because the initiatives that succeed are those that were implemented fully into plans that are reviewed on a quarterly, annual basis. Goals that you set once and never think about again never succeed. And so we can know by that is like thinking about from goal setting, the ones you never look at twice never succeed. So you know that for a fact. And then if only 20 to 30% in change management succeed, a lot of people are just setting them one and done. We did that strategic plan, check, and then you never look at it again. And that's not how this has to work.
And remember that communication and stability that you just described helps to manage people's chronic stress and burnout, right?
Yes.
Because we see
Yes.
two-thirds of workers experience burnout during a crisis, during all these transitions and that chaos that can come with that when we're not stable, measured, communicating, and circling back and giving the why, right? We have to get much better at explaining the why behind decisions and putting together the metrics that support how we're measuring those changes as they occur. When we don't do that, that's the chronic stress, that's the burnout, that's when we lose a big chunk of our workforce. And that constant churn, we know, is just a death nail for a lot of
Yeah.
organizations.
Well, and my board and the people I'm with are, appointed by a governor. There's a new election coming up in 2026.
Hmm.
So there's already some
Yeah.
consternation about, well, what if we get a new governor? Does that change the board? Well, maybe the people, but if we've done our job right with creating the
Mhm.
policies and the procedures and like how the day in and day out works,
Yeah.
then you've created stability for those long-term employees that are still there, regardless of the personalities that are appointed. And so it's even more critical in those types of roles when
Yes.
you've got people appointed that are coming in and out to have ongoing policies and procedures that make sense so that those folks have that stability. And oftentimes that's that personality as well. 100% in my office, the folks that have that more charismatic leadership, fly by the seat of their pants are the appointed ones. And the
Yeah.
ones that are more of those green Enneagram 2 servant heart, really working hard for the state government are those long-term loyal employees. So they need that stability because this constant change stuff drives them crazy. And when you're thinking about that, that's an important thing to think about in your office when you're talking about the changes. Like who in your office needs to hear about that are energized by those changes and want to talk about that, and then who gets completely overwhelmed and are just not going to be able to handle the new thing, right? You don't want those folks that's not their personality to really have to hear all of that because a lot of times too, a lot of these proposals and things, bottom line, even implementing it isn't as big or as grand as the initial proposal.
Right.
And so when you get people hearing the big thing that freaks everybody out, it's not beneficial to them. They need to just know when the rubber meets the road, this is the part we have to do. And so you've got to be careful in leadership not to just overwhelm your people when they're trying to do the job on the mission that you gave them. But like, hey, when there's something that changes, we'll let you know. And then you as leadership deal with that separate because that's really a part of it, a change management piece that just doesn't work. You can't just overwhelm people be like me talking about the big, beautiful bill in the office. I have no idea how that impacts anybody presently on the ground. I'm going to learn and I'm going to have some pieces that may impact us and we'll talk about it when we get there. But I ain't talking about it now because I don't know anything. And because it's so big and not necessarily beautiful, but humongous, who knows what all those changes are once it gets down to me. And so why go into all that and freak out people? It's like it's not fathomable for my brain to even get what's in there, let alone try to tell how that's going to impact my day job. So I think we have to do a better job as leaders, just, knowing when to share, not to share, so we don't cause stress because we're just adding to people's stress that way. And it's not helpful.
And sometimes just sharing, I'm paying attention to it as a
Yeah.
leader, is all you need to share because your employees just need to have trust and faith that you know what's going on. And that
Yeah.
seems silly, but I can't tell you how many leaders we've coached over the years that were in the process of a big change, and we would meet with employees separate, and they'd be like, "We have no idea what's going on."
Yeah.
Well, they actually did know, but they felt like they didn't know because they weren't receiving regular communication.
Yep.
So something as simple as a weekly email that says, I'm paying attention to this, there's nothing new to report. It changed employees' attitudes. It had changed their stress levels just getting a nugget of information. And it can
Yep.
seem silly sometimes when you're in the stuck in the minutia of all the things going on. But those little things matter a lot. And we can't forget that, especially when we're going through these really sometimes dramatic shifts that we're seeing
Yep.
happening across the board.
Yep. There's an RFP out in the corrections world, which is tangential to my department. It's not me
Mhm.
affected directly, but I have some pieces that impact. And it was about privatizing and putting into managed care kind of medical in the correctional institutions. Because it is tangential to my job and there are pieces that matter to me, I did read the bid. I did ask questions about that bid. It's still playing out in our state. But my staff they heard about it because it hit the news, so they all freaked out about it. But that's
Mhm.
exactly the message I had to them is like, don't worry about it. I'm going to read it. And they're like, you're going to read the whole thing? I'm like, yeah, because I need to know how it impacts me actually directly. And then I'll ask the questions that we need as a group. There was one other person that kind of wanted to read it in the office, but that's it. Didn't make everybody else do it. But at the same time, you're right. We are going to talk about it. And I'll be like, hey, here's some questions I had because these are some pieces that weren't really in there. So we'll address those. And they're like, oh, well, they've got all kinds of opinions about people losing their retirement benefits and losing their hours of, that they've saved for health care, and their days off. And I don't know, they got all sorts of opinions. And I'm like, that's not anything that we need to talk about now, we need to work on, this is the timeline of this, and we need to make sure
Yep.
that the board has its pieces in it. And so, but it, kind of tamping that down, because that could be a big emotional thing if you make it so, when in reality, we just have to work alongside the new partner, whoever that's going to be.
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure that we have a good working relationship with them and that we get the information we need to do our job. And that's it. The rest of it is opinions and how we feel about things. And then, well, that means they're going to do, privatize this next and do that next. So no, 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 no. Let's all bring it back down, because that's how we let into chronic stress and burnout, is worried about what's coming down the pipe that we have no idea, right? And so it's hard. You've got to get people focused on the right thing. So Jason, we've got a couple of resources in here to help people. Talk about that. Like what can people do if we're stuck in all of this? Because it just keeps coming. So what do we do?
I have no idea.
Oh, come on now.
Buddy, I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. I'm like, resources? What resources do we have? This is a great idea. I guess you could call us. We're your resource. I don't know where we're going at all.
Okay. I don't think that's true a bit, but here we are. So we are going to be talking about some different things in the future, like what you do to know what we can do when we're in crisis management. That's crazy. But what you do, for those that are listening, is you actually get help. Again, if you need help, if you're stuck and you're not sure how if you don't know how you are impacted by things, ask questions for one. If you're not sure how the change out there on whatever issue is going on impacts you, ask. There are some things in my office that I need to change, but mine is attached to other departments. And so they need to make their changes first before I can make mine. Sometimes knowing that is like, okay, what's the order of people that need to make the changes? Like who goes first? Because if you're a provider and you're in maybe the district change for Iowa, your changes will come later, right? It had to be the big group needed to get contracted to run statewide. You all had to get contracts signed with them by a certain date to provide certain services. Now you're doing those things. The next thing asked of you may be data collection. The next thing asked of you may be reporting back on whatever was working, or maybe can you do XYZ extra service they need you to do, right? So you think about, where do I land in that trajectory of change to know how I respond to it? Not worked up about they're signing contract, things that don't matter to you. You've got to focus on the stuff that matters to you. And this is my business. And so my business, we do this part. This is how it impacts us. And so again, back to that RFP, I sent that out because telemedicine, telepsych is in that. And I have friends that work in that space. So I wanted them to know, hey, this is going out and there's a piece in this about that topic that impacts you. Business opportunity, maybe. Partnership, maybe. Don't know. But, that's the piece you need to know about, is the part that impacts you, not the whole thing. It's too overwhelming. We can't keep up with all this.
So let's think about, how do you chunk that, right? So I like to timeline things. And so when we think, I'm back, Renee. I told you I was up spraying till 1 a.m. this morning. So
Yes.
think about how you chunk it. Think about how you timeline it, right? Because you need to match
Yes.
your response proportionally to what is there, right? And so we think about being proactive and looking on the horizon on those things that are going to occur, not the things that may occur, right?
Yes.
So keeping yourself anchored
Yes.
and measured along a specific timeline. And I think a lot of times we see people really struggling with how to match their response to where we're at on the appropriate timeline. And so I
Agreed.
think that's one of the best things, that we can do, or you can do as a leader, is
Yeah.
if you don't have the skill set to appropriately step back and separate yourself from the minutia and the emotion of it, and look at it from a perspective of, this is what we have to do at each gate we get to, right? I like to think about it as a gate. We get to this place, we make a decision, either we open that gate or we leave the gate closed and we go in a different direction. That way you keep the cattle in as well. And so as we think about that measured approach to how we do things, then you set your timeline to match that. And then your response will always be appropriate.
Agreed. That's exactly what he was going to say before. He just forgot because he hasn't had enough caffeine this morning. But yeah, when we're talking about change, you have to look at how am I impacted and what do I need to do? Not, oh my God, the world's ending because they got rid of whatever program and whatever. No, Let's look at like what are you going to do? And like right now, if you're listening and you're in Iowa and you're talking about the mental health changes, right? There's a big old settlement out there about children's services. You know, there's going to be business opportunities in the realm of children's services and a children's system because it's already laid out in front of you that the lawsuit says things are going to change. Do I know exactly what that's going to look like or what the name of the program is going to be or the requirements of the program? No, not yet. Too early. But I do know there's going to be opportunities to improve that because it needs to be improved per the law. And so you've got to look at that and be like, okay, there's some opportunities potentially coming down my pipe, right? The same with that RFP, looking at there's going to be some psychiatric, medical, or telehealth or whatever. There's opportunities there. Does that mean I know for sure that your personal group's going to get to do blank? No. But do I know that there's going to be people looking for bids to fill those gaps? Yes, I do. And so that means, hey, you need to have somebody in your organization who's looking forward to those things. That's not the same person that's stressing out the staff about the potential things you're all going to be changing and doing different. We don't do that. We
So
keep our
you've got
staff
to be
on the same.
honest. You've got to be honest in that same lens about your risk tolerance, right?
Yes.
Because you've got to
Yes.
be able to put yourself in uncomfortable. You got to get out of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
Because these opportunities are going to be there, but you can't keep doing things the same way. I've got a trip
No,
coming up, Renee. So let's put this in a perspective that people can understand, right? I've got a trip
let's do
coming
it.
up. I have to go speak in Austin, Texas, right?
Okay.
And didn't want to rent a car, and so I'm thinking it's not till later in the year, but I'm thinking, well, we'll just Uber from the airport to the
Hmm.
conference venue. And so I could do a cab, right? We used to call a cab and some guy would come to you and pick you up at the airport. But you know what we can do today? Guess in Austin, Texas, they now have the robo taxis,
Oh,
right?
good.
So I can have a Tesla with no driver come pick me up, right? Now, that's not the way I always used to get around. Like I used to
No.
actually rent a car or take a tram or do a different thing. But I need to get myself out of my comfort zone and get more comfortable with the way travel is probably going to be in the future, right? And so to get comfortable with that, I've got to put myself in those experiences because today the only place you can take a robo taxi, you can get Waymos in some other areas, but a robo taxi is exclusive to Austin, Texas. So while I'm in Austin, I better jump in and try out this new technology and get comfortable with it,
All
right?
right.
Because I feel like that's a good place to take a risk. Now, it
Hmm.
may or may not be a good idea. I don't know, but
Well, if by the George Jetsons terms, we should already be flying around
I know.
ourselves.
Where's my
This
flying
by
car?
this
I
year
want
in
what
the Jetsons world, we would have been flying. So
I know.
robotaxi is not that far off. So maybe it's a good idea to give it a whirl, right? You're never going to know if you don't get to try it. But you're right.
It's
You take the opportunity when the opportunity is afforded to you. If it's only available in Austin, Texas, you're in Austin, Texas, you give it a whirl. That's what we're talking about here with all this change management, right? You think about what's affordable to me, what's afforded to me, what's available to me, what's the opportunity ahead of me, and can I do that? And can I absorb the risk to try that? And if you can,
absolutely.
take the risk. If you can't, and that sounds super scary and it's going to make you sick to drive in a car without a person sitting there, then don't take it. That's what we're
You
talking
can
about
still
here.
take a traditional taxi, right? And so there's room
There's
for
still
everyone to
choices.
do
That's right.
whatever they want to do.
Choices.
But
Yeah.
remember, at some point, somebody had to stop manufacturing typewriters.
Yeah.
Because at some point the typewriter was no longer a viable means of writing a letter. And so we have to
True.
remember what parts of our industry is a typewriter, a pager. I go back in my history. That's just date ourselves, Renee.
Hmm.
I think of all the technologies that
Yeah.
were the best thing ever
That are now in
when I was
museums.
younger. They're
They're
now in
sitting in
museums.
museums. Uh-huh.
Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely, right? And so I think about all of those things that
Think about
were going to be
Blackberries with the buttons.
BlackBerry. I
Oh
loved my
man.
BlackBerry. Like
I
those were
liked
the
mine
best things
too.
ever,
Those were the best.
right?
They're gone.
I
They're
mean,
gone.
so
I know.
we just go through that list of things, and at the time, we never dreamed that we would outlive
No.
the usefulness
Yeah,
of
we
them, or
wouldn't
that
have
anything.
smartphones if we hadn't gone through all of those things, the flip phones and everything
Absolutely,
else. So
absolutely.
today we're going to focus on the Recovery Politician Self-Care Policy of the Week. Go to the state fair. Even if you don't like animals and stuff, the people watching. My goodness, the people watching is all worth it. It is so fun. You get to taste new foods you don't get anywhere else throughout the year. Some of my favorite foods where it's only available now at the fair because their storefronts have closed. So if I can't even get some of my favorite food if I don't go to the fair. And then all the free acts that are there to see, all the kids that you can support, whether it's from the dance teams and the cheer teams to the FFA teams and to their competitions, for the pie eating contests, for all the people who've baked their goods with serving, getting their prize ribbons for all the foods that they cook. Oh my goodness, there's so many awesome things at the fair. So wherever you are, wherever your fair is, go out and enjoy it because the states put them on. It's a big to do for your state. It is a wonderful opportunity for the state to showcase what's awesome about your state, and you definitely should support it. Jason, are you going to be going to your state fair this week?
I am, and I want to go on the day I get my free yardstick because it's one
Oh,
of the
yes.
last places you can get a yardstick when you want to
Yes.
measure something. And we talk about things that you don't use very much anymore. Yardsticks are one of those things that many people probably don't have in their closet
No.
anymore.
No, and some people don't even know how to use them. Well, today, folks, we talked about change and change management, and the world is changing at a much more quicker pace than it used to. Lots of things, and we're talked some about like how do you manage that, how do you chunk it, and make sure that you hit deadlines that pertain to you, but also not to overwhelm your staff and people in your office who may not be change tolerant that need you to not overstress them with the amounts of information. And it takes some real leadership and some wisdom to know who can handle the change and who can't. And if you're in leadership, you need to be able to handle change. It's going to be stressful for you as a leader if you can't, and you can get help if you can't, but be thankful about that. But before we go, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. Please leave us a positive review. We'll send you a prize. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you later.